There is a moment you've experienced more times than you can count. You agreed to something without remembering the exact moment you decided. You nodded, you complied, you followed the instruction. And only later, sometimes much later, you felt a quiet confusion. Why did I say yes? Most people dismiss this moment. They call it politeness, they call it habit, they call it just how things are. But that explanation is comforting, and comfort is often the first lie the mind tells itself. Because the truth is simpler and more unsettling. Your obedience did not begin with logic. It began before thought. This isn't a story about weak people. It's a story about the human brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. And once you see the pattern, you can never unsee it. This narration is not here to motivate you. It is here to expose mechanisms that shape your reactions, guide your compliance, and quietly decide your behavior, often without asking your permission. This isn't motivation. This is understanding the forces shaping your thoughts, your reactions, and your behavior, often without your awareness. Most people search for confidence, they search for discipline, they search for willpower. But willpower is a surface solution to a deeper design. Human behavior is not driven by strength, it is driven by structure. And today, you are going to see 5 psychological structures that cause people to obey automatically, not because they are told to, but because resistance feels unsafe. If you choose to subscribe, do it only if you want awareness, not reassurance, control, not comfort, clarity, not motivation. Now, let's begin where obedience truly starts. Trick 1. Authority before evidence. Most people believe they obey authority because it is right. That belief is incorrect. People obey authority because the brain is wired to shortcut survival decisions. Long before logic evolved, the nervous system learned a rule. Those who sound certain tend to be safer to follow. This is why tone often overrides truth. A calm, confident voice activates compliance faster than a correct argument. In psychological experiments, subjects followed instructions that violated their own moral judgment, not because they were convinced, but because certainty replaced responsibility. When authority speaks clearly, the brain relaxes. And when the brain relaxes, it stops questioning. This is where the mind reveals itself. Obedience is not agreement. It is relief. Relief from ambiguity. Relief from uncertainty. Relief from the burden of deciding alone. Part of you will resist this idea. You want to believe you analyze first, that you decide consciously. But watch what happens the next time someone speaks with calm dominance, measured pacing, and absolute confidence. Notice how quickly your body softens. The mind didn't surrender because the argument was strong. It surrendered because certainty feels like safety. Trick 2. The illusion of choice. Here's what quietly controls you. The brain obeys more easily when it believes it is choosing. This is not freedom. This is designed autonomy. When given 2 options, both leading to the same outcome, the mind experiences control without having it. This structure appears everywhere. Would you prefer this now or later? Do you want option A or option B? Should we do it this way or that way? Notice what is missing: the option to refuse entirely. Psychologically, refusal requires more energy than selection. Selection feels cooperative. Refusal feels confrontational. The mind avoids confrontation by default. In behavioral studies, compliance rates increase dramatically when people are offered a limited choice instead of a direct command. Why? Because resistance triggers social risk. Choice disguises obedience as participation. This is why the most effective influence doesn't push, it frames. Once the mind enters selection mode, it stops asking whether to comply and starts deciding how. That shift happens silently. And once it happens, obedience feels self-authored. Trick 3. Social proof and the fear of isolation. Most people never notice this. The brain fears isolation more than error. From an evolutionary perspective, being wrong was survivable. Being excluded was not. This is why behavior spreads faster than logic. When the brain detects that others are doing it, it stops evaluating outcomes and starts preserving belonging. You don't copy crowds because you think they're right. You copy them because standing alone activates threat circuitry. In experiments, participants gave obviously wrong answers to simple questions, just to match the group, not because they were confused, because disagreement feels dangerous at a neurological level. This is not weakness, it is inheritance. Your nervous system learned this rule long before language. Belong first, question later. This is why silence often equals consent. This is why people comply with systems they privately doubt. This is why courage feels physically uncomfortable. The body interprets deviation as risk, and the mind obeys to restore equilibrium. Trick 4. Emotional debt and the pressure to repay. Here is a truth most people don't like to face. Obedience often begins with kindness. When someone gives you something, attention, help, validation, the brain creates an internal imbalance. This imbalance feels like debt, and debt demands closure. Psychologists call this the norm of reciprocity. But beneath the term is a deeper mechanism. Unpaid emotional debt creates tension. Compliance relieves it. That's why small favors often lead to large agreements. Not because the favor was valuable, but because the obligation was internalized. Part of you will resist this. You want to believe gratitude is pure, that kindness is neutral. But the mind doesn't track intention. It tracks balance, and balance must be restored. This is why manipulators often begin with generosity, not to help, but to anchor obligation. Once obligation exists, resistance feels unfair, and the most effective obedience is the kind that feels morally justified. Trick 5. Gradual escalation and the trap of consistency. This is where obedience becomes invisible. The mind is deeply invested in consistency. Once you act in a certain way, your identity begins to defend that action. This is why small commitments are dangerous. Not because they matter, but because they set precedent. In classic psychological studies, people who agreed to a minor request were far more likely to agree to extreme ones later, not because the later request made sense, but because refusal would contradict the self-image already formed. I'm the kind of person who helps. I'm the kind of person who agrees. I've already gone this far. The mind hates internal conflict, and consistency resolves it. This is how obedience scales, not through force, but through self-protection. Once the identity is invested, the behavior defends itself. Why these tricks work together? These mechanisms are not separate, they form a system. Authority reduces doubt, choice masks control, social proof enforces alignment, reciprocity creates obligation. Consistency locks identity. Together, they bypass conscious resistance, not by overpowering the mind, but by working with its design. The uncomfortable truth is this: your mind is not built to resist influence. It is built to function efficiently in groups, and efficiency often looks like obedience. This does not mean you are powerless, but it does mean awareness must come before action. Because once the mechanism activates, choice arrives too late. Sit with this for a moment. Notice how often your behavior made sense emotionally before it made sense logically. Notice how rarely obedience felt forced. That is the real revelation. Control is most effective when it doesn't feel like control at all. Awareness doesn't make you immune, but it gives you a pause, a moment of distance, a gap between trigger and response. And in that gap, something rare becomes possible: choice. If you want to keep understanding what shapes you from the inside, subscribe, not for motivation, but for clarity.